So welcome everyone. This is our second episode in our series of vlogs. I'm Liz Leach Murphy from Imagineer, one of the directors and founders of the organisation. And I'm going to pass you over to Sarah so she can introduce herself too.
Hello, I'm Sarah Holmes. I'm also one of the directors of Imagineer, and we're really happy to be talking to you today.
Thanks, Sarah. So as an organisation, Imagineer is absolutely founded in and committed to self-directed support and the whole principle of people being able to lead their own lives and be in the driving seat of their own lives too. This is the second episode. We was hoping to be doing an interview during the second episode of these vlogs, but the white paper came out and we felt that it was really important for us to be able to give a response to the white paper, which is people, places and populations. We will provide a link to that white paper in the comments below this vlog in YouTube. So you'll be able to access the full document there. We wanted just to have a chance to explore the content of that document and how we feel it aligns with self-directed support and how it helps to move forward on the principles and the purpose around self-directed support as well. So that's what we want to cover today. If you want to know more about Imagineer and what we do, we talked a lot about that in our first episode. So if you go onto our vlog channel on YouTube and watch the first episode, you'll get background information on us as an organisation. But you can also go to our website, imagineer.org.uk, and there's loads of information on there. So I'm going to pass on to Sarah now, and Sarah's going to give us an overview of what is in the white paper.
Thanks, Liz. So just as a little intro, the white paper came out in February 2022. So if you're watching this as soon as we've premiered it on the YouTube channel, it's quite hot off the press at this point in time. And previous to that, we had the white paper called People at the Heart of Care, which came out in December 2021. So the government have released these two papers quite intentionally, I think, very close together, and they do link up in some senses. The first paper in December focused on the perspective and the experience of the person and the personalisation of care and support that they receive and the experience they have through the journey of social care and health services. This paper is very much focused on the integration of health and social care services. So to give it its full title, it's called Health and Social Care Integration, Joining Up Care for People, Places and Populations. So it's very much looking at a place-based approach to bringing together health and social care services in local areas. So the paper focuses on the model of integrated care systems. You might have heard this term being used quite a bit, maybe in the media, maybe on social media, or if you follow any local authority or social care type think tanks or different channels that are talking about this stuff at the moment. And an integrated care system can sometimes be referred to in its acronym, which is ICS. So we may use those two terms interchangeably during the course of our chat today, and it's really about a focus on the places which sit within an ICS area. So when the paper refers to places, it's actually talking about an area of a geographic size with a certain population size attached to it. So in the paper, it describes a place size as being between 250,000 and 500,000 people. And so you can imagine in an ICS area, depending on how many people are in the local population, there could be 2 to 4 places within that ICS area. So that's just to give you a kind of an understanding and a reference point for the size of the area and the number of people we're talking about when we unpack this paper a little bit. And so really, we're going to look at what's happening at the place level and what the paper says about that and where we see some of the opportunities in progressing self-directed support, personalised services and people being able to experience real, genuine, authentic citizenship within the areas where they live, their neighbourhoods and their communities. So yeah, there's quite a lot of key themes through the paper, and I thought, Liz, we could maybe unpack some of those themes together now. Were there any particularly that stood out for you?
It covers such a wide area as a paper, doesn't it? Actually, when people get a chance to look into the paper, it does cover quite a wide range of topics. I think one of the things that I think is a really good starting point for us, especially for what we do, is this re-emphasis on the support for personal budgets, personal health budgets, and integrated personal budgets. And I think it'd be great for us to explore that a little bit, and then how that links into all the other areas and all the other key themes that are in there. For me, it's just good to know that there is that re-emphasis of that commitment around personal budgets, and how personal budgets open up the opportunity for people to have a flexible approach to the support, and people are able to have a wider range of options available to them. And when you link that in with the focus on community-centred care, you begin to appreciate that this opens up the doorway and the opportunity to get some really good community-rooted solutions around what good care and support looks like. And I know that there is kind of some conversation in the paper as well around community hubs, and that was interesting because when we go back to the start of support brokerage and the start of the support brokerage conversations with what was the national brokerage network, we talked hugely around the importance of localised, community-based, community-led hubs. And in fact, it's something we still talk about in the support brokerage training as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? It all seems to be coming back to that concept of local and community-based and neighbourhood-based, and that really sits very strongly with the theme of citizenship and self-direction, which is what we talk about all the time in our work at Imagineer, isn't it? You know, we'll unpack it in a bit more detail later on, but it's really interesting how there's been a recognition that bringing resources together in a local area allows more flexible use of resource. It allows for efficiencies in the spends of the budget, so you're not replicating the same services in different sectors, but you're bringing those sectors together and having a single resource that's more flexible across the piece based on where the place is, based on the area. And that means that budget is able to be used more flexibly, it's able to stretch further, and you're able to come up with much more creative solutions on a community-based level. And interestingly, they're not prescribing a model for how these ICSs look in the paper. They've got an example model in there, but actually what they're saying is it's down to the local area to determine what their model will look like. And I think that's really interesting because it's bringing the emphasis to the local level to determine what makes sense for their local needs. And that absolutely sits as well with what we talk about in support brokerage and self-directed support and community development, isn't it?
Yeah. It leans into a lot of them conversations we've been having with the Citizen Network and the Neighbourhood Democracy movement as well, and actually opening up the potential for that to be realised in local areas. I guess that this means that we've got a real window of opportunity to see some significant change at a local level and to see some activity at a local level to enable change to happen in a way that makes sense, rather than it being prescribed from an authoritative position. It's developed and grown from a really local level.
Yeah,
I guess it's that kind of thing of, now this opportunity is here, how do you make the most of it, and how do we make sure that the right people are involved in them conversations? Because I think that a lot of local people, because local areas have not had that opportunity for a long time, a lot of, you know, some people in local areas could feel quite disenfranchised with that whole idea of self-determination and having influence around what happens in my local area and what happens in my own life. So it's going to be really interesting to see how the white paper and the realisation of the white paper will change some of the dynamics as well, and to hear some of the stories of how that changes.
Yeah, they've left it quite open, haven't they? Because they're sort of saying that there's going to be further engagement work with stakeholders, which leads us to believe there'll be further sort of opportunities for people to feed into that process, because they've talked about this idea of a national outcomes framework, which will map across to all of the other different outcomes frameworks. Because the first thing you think about when they start talking about another set of outcomes, another framework we've got to tick the boxes for, is the outcomes frameworks almost in a sense start bumping into each other if you're not careful. So the idea of an overarching national outcomes framework that helps to weave together all of those other ones is an interesting concept, I think, and I'm not sure how I feel about it at the moment. I think the jury's out on that one. But the second part of that dialogue is for local areas to determine their own local outcomes frameworks that sit underneath that. And I think that's a really interesting idea, because if you've got the overarching broader outcomes at a national level, as long as your local priorities are kind of sitting within those outcomes, you're still meeting the national framework outcomes as well. But you're able to kind of bespoke and tailor your local level outcomes to fit with the needs of the local population. So that will be a really interesting one to watch, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's moving. I think it's this recognition that outcomes and the whole language around outcomes can sometimes come across as being quite determined by those that have designed the outcomes framework, whereas what we're really wanting to see is a difference made, and how has this made a difference in people's life experience and the way that people connect up with each other. So that's going to be really interesting to see. Some of the paper actually reiterates some of the language and some of the intention and vision for health and social care that's been around for a very, very long time.
Yeah, that's true.
And we're still talking about direct payments and personal budgets. And so I guess what I'm really interested in here is there's been an investment in a new white paper that clearly shows an intention to drive forward certain things within the provision of social care. But what is going to happen now that shifts us into a place of it making a real difference?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I think a part of that interesting dynamic is this idea of integrating health and social care together. So if you think about how they're structured, typically strategic decisions around NHS England sit at a central level, at a national level, and decisions about social care sit at a local government level in the local authority. So if we're talking about creating a system where those two sectors come together on a local level to make decisions, it'll be really interesting to see how systems and processes are changed to allow that dialogue to happen, because where the decision makers sit will be very different from those two sides, and obviously the local health boards will have a part to play in that. But it's really interesting because one of the key themes throughout the paper is about this idea of an agile workforce, where people can move between roles in the NHS and care sectors. So there's a bit of a clue there about bringing people together in similar decision-making roles, but they can move between the two areas once those different systems are integrated. So again, I'm really interested to see what that's going to look like. And I can't fathom it at the moment, but I think if they can do it and if they can make a success of it, that makes so much sense to me, because decision making needs to be joined up. It needs to stop being siloed. It needs to stop being, we're in health, that's a social care issue, pass it over to social care. We're in social care, that's a health issue, it's nothing to do with us, pass it back over to health. And actually, if people came together and looked at those issues together, there would be an awful lot of sensible dialogue going on, I think. So watch this space again for that bit as well.
And it's such a pertinent point, is that, because how many times do we have conversations with individuals and families that find themselves being in this void between the two of the two authorities deciding who's going to take responsibility for that overall budget. And I really picked up on that point as well around the agile workforce. And there was a really important part of the paper around the training and making sure that training's portable between one area of work to another, so people aren't having to retrain on the same subjects, and that those that work within health will be trained within the subjects that we find in social care, and sometimes the other way around as well. So this kind of portability between the two places really begins to be possible. But I think one of the things that really struck me in that element of the paper is how the work that we do, and when people have their own budget and they're employing their own team, quite often the most important training for that team is a very specific training around how to support me well and what makes my life make sense. Absolutely. And how you can help me with that. And I think that there is that thing of, we don't want to lose that. We want, you know, there is the importance of the generic training and the upskilling and the knowledge development, but within this portability and agile workforce, we definitely don't want a situation where it's then assumed that anybody can come in to work with anyone, because we miss that personability and that personalization in that approach. And so I thought that was going to be an interesting dynamic that we need to see, you know, see how that plays out. And anybody who's involved in self-directed support to have an influence, to be with them stakeholders around that table, to make sure that them important developments that we've seen over the last few decades aren't lost in the move towards realising the aspirations of the white paper.
Yeah, definitely. Some of the other key themes then that are coming through, I thought one of the interesting ones was about having this single person that's accountable at a local level for the delivery of the shared plan that's going to happen in that local place-based level. And sort of reading into it a little bit, looking at the role of the Care Quality Commission in that as well, CQC. So this idea that there'll be these outcomes frameworks and there'll be a local plan that will be set for the local area, and this single person will be accountable for delivering against that plan. And part of that will be that all of the provider organisations within that local place-based area will also, who are also being regulated by CQC and inspected by CQC, they will also be having to deliver to that same set of outcomes that is set at the local level for the ICS and the place that they're working in. And so that's a really interesting concept, because it means that when providers are being inspected, they're not just looking at what they do as an organisation in an insular way, but they're looking at how, as a provider, they're contributing to the outcomes of the local area for that plan. And that's a really interesting shift. And again, I'll be really interested to see how that works in practice. But there's potential, if it's done really well, to have providers working in a way that helps to achieve those wider objectives. And some of those objectives are going to be things to do with personalisation and individualised and bespoke support, and you know, people achieving personal outcomes as a result of the support that they receive. So I think that's a really interesting one as well.
It is, isn't it? It's an interesting new model. And in fact, when we think about the conversations we've had in the past about shifting control and shifting more power to a place of community, how some of the ideas we've come up with around what that could look like has actually had some of that in that mix as well, and in that picture and in that vision. There's one thing around that I'm thinking of around, well, how do we make sure that autonomy stays? How do we make sure that actually that there's making sure it makes sense on a local level, and we don't end up in a situation where what good looks like is prescribed from a regulatory point of view, but is actually determined by what makes sense in that local community and the makeup of that local community as well. So let's hope that this will lead to a different approach, and let's hope that this will open up a more localized reference point for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely.
Is there anything, when you were reading the paper, is there anything for you that kind of stood out as an area of concern?
I suppose, for want of a better phrase, it seemed a little bit wishy-washy in places. So I felt it lacked a bit of gumption, like a bit of it lays out some ideas and some concepts, but it doesn't really feel that strong yet. So obviously it's a white paper at the moment, and it needs to become a bill, and it needs to go through the statute process if it's going to become part of a legal framework. But I just felt it was a little bit wishy-washy. And as you said earlier, there seems to be a repetition of a lot of messages that we've been hearing for the last 20, 30 years in different government policy and, documents and initiatives and things like that. So I think, I mean, I know you picked up on it and you'll probably mention it yourself, but something around the language that's used in different parts of the paper as well. Don't know if you want to comment on that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, there are a few areas that struck concern for me, and you're right, language was one of them. I think with any document like this is a white paper. This is a future of health and social care. This is a visionary document, and for this to be a visionary document that has a real strength behind it, it needs to be really coming from a sound value base. For me, it's like your values determine your actions determine the outcome. It all comes together, doesn't it? And there was just some elements of the language in the paper where I thought, is this coming from the right value base for this to be purposeful? And the one that really stood out for me was there was a particular word around suffering, and people suffering with mental health, suffering with dementia. And that for me is very old, quite paternalistic language. And it worries me that actually, does that give a window, a bit of an insight into the value base that this document has come from? And if it does, there needs to be some shifts in that value base before we'll ever see a real difference in the delivery.
Yeah, I agree. It's moving back into that whole concept of professional gift model, isn't it?
Yes. Yeah.
As outlined by Simon Duffy many years ago, but the whole concept that as professionals we know what's best for you and we're going to tell you what you need, rather than starting from a place of what do you need, what would work well for you, what would be helpful. Do you have any ideas about how we could do this to make your life feel like it's working better for you? So yeah, it is that whole, you're right, it's the value base that whole narrative comes from in the first place, isn't it? And I don't think people always recognize that that's what the case is. People particularly in positions of authority, where they are pulling together strategy, developing vision. I don't know whether there's always an awareness of that, which is very, very interesting, isn't it? If you're tasked with coming up with a vision for what the future of social care and health should look like in our country. I mean, that's a ridiculous task, isn't it? And I don't know how you even go about starting without having a conversation with the people who are going to be accessing that in the first place. And also listening to what's not been working for people as well, so you know what needs to change. So and
it's falling back into this done to, done for, whereas what we recognize is what really works is alongside and together, and falling back into the values of inclusion, which are one of our strongest steers, is together we are better. And actually to have a document that recognizes that this is a vision and a future direction for citizens.
Yeah, that's right. Absolutely.
Not just recipients of health and social care, because any one of us could become a recipient of health and social care at any point of our lives. So if we just write a document that's seen as that narrow view, then it's missing the point that actually this is for every citizen.
Absolutely.
And you mentioned the professional gift model and citizenship model. We should put a link to that in the comments under the vlog as well.
We can
so
do
people
that.
can link into that. So I guess it'd be good for us to explore a little bit around the opportunities as well, and what we can bring into the conversation as practitioners, and what we can bring into this through the work that we do. But generally, what are the opportunities?
Maybe before we do that, it's good to mention what the paper sees as the key enablers of this integration happening, so we can kind of frame our next bit under those key enablers. So one of the key things that they talk about repeatedly is workforce, having an agile workforce, having a workforce that's integrated, working together, working flexibly, and working in a place-based way. There's lots of reference to digital tools, particularly around people having access to their own information, their health records, things like that. And this idea of data sharing across different sectors and departments. So there isn't this need for people having to keep filling in forms, keep giving the same information over and over again. Now, this is not a new idea. This has been mentioned in so many different innovative processes and systems that we've seen coming through in the last 20 years. But actually, if they can achieve full integration of data sharing across health and social care, it could radically transform people's experience of accessing systems, either from a health or a social care perspective, because they won't have to keep going back to this same situation of sharing their information over and over again. Which can be incredibly draining and traumatic and distressing for some people if they're having to keep repeating those same messages. So that's an interesting one. And then the final bit is we've mentioned already, is this idea of pooling budgets and aligning finances and resources from the different areas so they can bring together and create cost efficiencies, presumably. So if they're saving some money by doing that, maybe there'll be a bit more budget available to do some of the good stuff that's needed in communities. And one of the things that's mentioned as a key theme through the paper is having a greater emphasis on prevention,
Yes,
you know, so that people don't even have to enter the system in the first place. So this idea of community well-being, you know, and doing life well and not needing to access the system, because we've really done some good thinking around what prevents people falling into the stream, you know, rather than thinking, let's go further up the stream and work out where the problems are happening before they happen, and let's put some money up there so that we don't get to this point where we're dealing with crisis downstream all the time, where people are actually needing to access those formal health and social care services. So those are kind of the key enablers that the paper talks about in terms of allowing this integration stuff to happen. So let's then think about what the opportunities are from our point of view, particularly around, you know, self-directed support and so on. So what are your thoughts around that?
Well, it opens up a whole area, and I think that whole conversation around prevention is a key area. In a lot of the conversations that we're involved in, we're always talking about starting from a place of community. Yeah. Starting from a place of what's happening in community and what makes sense from that space, and really shifting that dynamic of that conversation as well, away from, as Cormac Russell would say, away from what's wrong to what's strong, you know, and actually really changing that conversation massively. And so, yeah, absolutely. I think every single one of us, if we was to sit down and have a conversation about what's working in our lives, we'd equally be able to say what's not working in our lives, and that would be the same for anyone. But we know that actually, to move to a better place in life, we concentrate on building on what's working and then shifting what's not working. If we focused on what's not working, we'd end up in a complete rabbit hole, wouldn't we? And the outcomes would not be good. So I think that kind of recognizing prevention from that perspective is really important, and not recognizing prevention from a place of, we know what the problems are and let's stop the problems from happening. But prevention is actually about, let's recognize what's great and let's help to build that a bit more, and let's not us prescribe what that looks like, but let's create the conditions and the environment where that can that can happen in its own way, in its own pace, in a way that makes sense to people. And I think that's really what really floats my boat and floats our boat,
Yeah,
in a
definitely.
sense. And it's, but that to achieve that actually is going to take a lot of shifting of assumptions and mindset and the system processes we have in place. There's so much that needs to shift to actually create them conditions, and bringing that ability in for us to be human together rather than for us to be serviced together.
Yeah, it all comes down to how these place-based arrangements and these shared plans on the local level are going to look, and who's going to be involved in helping to decide what goes into those plans for a local level, because that's going to be the real key driver to any activity that happens, isn't it? So yeah, I think that will be really interesting. For me, I'm dead excited about the concept of bringing together of budgets enables a potentially really creative and flexible use of funding to meet people's needs in a really personalised way. And we talk about it a lot in our work, and I know we've started working with people with these types of arrangements, but individual service funds, which have been mentioned within Care Act statutory guidance since the document came out in 2014, started to be implemented around 2015 sort of time. But because individual service funds are mentioned as a way of taking a personal budget arrangement, but it's not a statutory duty for local authorities to have to provide them, they haven't really taken off in a lot of areas. They're starting to emerge, and there's been some really good work done in starting to help local authorities think through the commissioning arrangements of that, and what does that look on a logistical and practical level, and how do you stimulate the provider marketplace to understand how to work with those arrangements. But for me, the opportunity is if we're looking at these integrated budgets in the ICS system way of working, it allows that vehicle, the individual service fund model, to be the way of carrying that budget through and helping the person to really translate their support into a very, very bespoke and personalised way, which instead of having to go to different commissioning managers to sign off on different parts of a person's plan, this is the health bit, this is the social care bit, having that integrated budget in the form of an individual service fund and using that as the vehicle to make it work really creates an opportunity for some really good self-directed bespoke support, and the providers in the local place area can respond to that and start working alongside that. But there'll be much more of an emphasis on this concept of support brokerage, which is actually working alongside the person to help them determine what good support looks like for them. So they can still have their provider managing the support, holding the budget for them, but actually it's much more of an alongside relationship, and the provider takes on much more of this support brokerage role in enabling the person to do that self-direction and to spend their budget in ways that make sense for them, not just on direct support, but on things that are happening in their local area. And for me, that's one of the most exciting opportunities that are coming out of this paper, because we have been doing support brokerage for years. And again, it's one of those things that hasn't taken off in a massive way because it's held back by local authority policy often in how people can use their personal budget or their direct payment. And that really is a limiting factor in people being able to realise proper self-direction, because they're held back by these policies and these restrictions and these rules all the time. So for me, the opportunity to really help individual service funds take off properly, where people have different elements of funding coming together in one pot, working with local providers to actually tailor their own package of support in a way that makes sense for them. I just think that's fantastically exciting personally. So anyway, I'll stop banging on about it. But for me, that was one of the ones I really wanted to talk about, because I just think it's a great opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think...
And any others?
I feel we've explored. I feel like we've explored it. And you know, to be honest, I think if we were to add any more onto what we've already said, we'd be diluting everything we just said. I think we've kind of got it. And what you just finished on there is where we're at. That completely aligns with where we are as an organisation, and beyond our organisation and the collective of people that we're networked into. I know that they would completely align with what you've just shared there as well. So I think with this, it is going to be now a case of watch this space, which is what you said earlier on, and actually making the use of any opportunity that becomes available to influence the direction that the white paper takes. So definitely. Any discussion groups or any way of shaping this up, because as you also said earlier, this feels very much like quite an open paper. There's no definitives in it around how, specifically around how. So I think that there is going to be opportunities, hopefully, to influence how on the delivery of this white paper once it becomes legislative as well.
Definitely. And that there's things that hook into the other white paper that I can see obvious connections happening around. They talked about family hubs, didn't they, and putting funding into local family hubs. So there's an opportunity there to work at a community level with families, maybe that have children, young people with special educational needs and disabilities. Those children and young people at some point will be moving from childhood into adulthood, so there's that whole piece around doing better transitions with where you've got joined up working from health and social care properly, because it's integrated. So there's that opportunity there. And then there was a little bit in the paper that I sort of jumped on, which was around making sure that the budget spend from the local area is focused on local activity and local services. And immediately in my head I went to the whole the ongoing dialogue, which we get really sick of talking about actually, but it's a real issue, is people in long stay hospitals, particularly people with learning disabilities and autism, who've been moved out of area because there's no suitable providers in the local area who know how to work with them in a really good way in their community, that they're being shipped off to these long stay hospital type institutions, and often end up staying there for months and years because they struggle to find a way to bring them back to area again. And for me, that whole concept of making sure there's an increase in activity and budget spend within that local area, for me, that becomes a target that will need to be hit in terms of bringing people back into area. And again, maybe that's a lever that we can push on in terms of pushing the whole concept of people having ordinary lives, ordinary homes, and being citizens in their local community.
Yes, absolutely.
So there's so much
and demonstrating
we can
that
go on
whole,
about, isn't there?
Demonstrating that whole approach of how to sustain a community life after leaving an institutional or a hospital setting, and how to break this pattern of the institutional way of being and thinking and working, moving into the community with the individual, and moving into a space where actually life becomes community and citizen-led life. Not service recipient life. And I think we've got so much that we can bring into that conversation and bring into that way of thinking and way of doing things. So Sarah, how do people keep in touch with us?
I love having these chats because we just end up putting the world to rights, don't we? It's great. But if you like what you've heard today, and if you're really interested in what we do, you want to find out more about some of the work that we do, we're involved in so many different projects around lots of the things we've been discussing today, actually. We deliver training, we do consultancy work, we work alongside individuals and families to help them self-direct their own support. So there's lots of different stuff you can hook into if you're interested. So really good starting place for that. Liz mentioned at the beginning, but I'll repeat again, is our website, website, and we've recently done lots of work on our website to try and make it more engaging, more inspiring, and definitely more accessible. So hopefully you'll be able to find information that you're interested in and looking for. So you can find our website at www.imagineer.org.uk. We have a YouTube channel, which you are watching us on. But if you've just found this video by accident, come across it on social media or just through a general web search or something, make sure you actually click onto our channel name and go onto the channel page itself, because we've got a whole load of content on there. So we've got the vlog, which is this that you're listening to now, but we've also got lots of explainer videos. We've got interviews with people sharing their stories, loads of interesting content around self-directed support and support brokerage, which is our main activity at Imagineer. So that's a really good place if you're interested in what we do, to go and find out more information. We push out content onto 3 main channels on social media pretty much on a daily basis. So if you use Facebook, Twitter or LinkedIn, you can find our page on @ImagineerCIC. That's the same across all 3 of those channels. And we also have a mailing list. So if you're interested in receiving regular news and updates about what we're involved in, what we're doing, opportunities for you to partner with us or engage with us, information about training that we offer, all of those sorts of things could be quite useful for you as well, then do sign up to the newsletter mailing list, and we'll send you information. We promise not to bombard you, but we send the newsletter out once a month, and then occasionally we'll send you a direct mail about an opportunity you might be interested in if you've told us that in your preferences. So you can find the link to subscribe. If you go onto our website, there is a subscribe button. So you can click that, go through, put in just your name and your email address, and tick any preferences for information you'd like to receive, and then we will send those things to you. And then finally, we have a new webinar which we're releasing on demand soon on our website, so watch this space, keep an eye out, on introduction to support brokerage. So if what we've been talking about today interests you but you're not really sure about what it means and you'd like to know more, the introduction to support brokerage webinar is a really great place to start. We also provide full support brokerage training. That's if you want to become an accredited support broker and practice as a support broker. But that's an 8-session course. So if you're just interested in finding out what it's about and learning about the basics of it, you can watch the on-demand webinar. So that will be available through the webinar page on our website very soon. So watch this space. And I think that's everything. Have I missed anything, Liz?
That is everything. I've realised how many ways there is of staying in touch with us. It's quite phenomenal.
Yes, isn't it? Hopefully people will not miss us. So with that, I think we're done. Thank you so much. If you're still watching, well done for getting to the end. Thank you for being with us. We hope you found this useful and helpful. We've dropped some useful links into the show notes underneath the episode information on YouTube. So you can have a read of that and click through those links to find the information we referred to. And we hope you will stay in touch. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so that when the next vlog pops up, you'll get a notification as well. I think that's it. So thank you very much.
One final, we promise one final thing. On the comments underneath, we would love to hear your thoughts on the content of this vlog, but also what your thoughts are on the white paper as well. So please make use of the comments, and hopefully we can strike up a conversation there on the white paper. So thank you very much, Sarah. I've enjoyed that very much.
Me too. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you again soon.
See you all soon.